Inspired by the Civil Rights Movement, Students for a Democratic Society was formed in 1962 to address issues of poverty, as well as feelings of helplessness, alienation, and indifference in African American and working class communities. The group, which focused initially on community organizing, it projected our image beyond the campus, past campus sandlot politics, to the real world of poverty, racism, police brutality, and the deep part of that is true too. If we didn't organize 5 community people, we nevertheless put maybe 500 kids through a very advanced course in sociology today, as it is on the streets. There was no substitute for that. And in that respect, it was not such an abysmal failure. And ERAP was one of the successes. But ERAP was a success for middle-class college kids who were struggling to understand their world and to broaden their experience, to reach out beyond the parochial limits of their class experience and see what other people had to live. One of the objections to getting involved in an anti-war movement was that the war was going to go away, and then where would you be? Everybody just assumed that because the war looked so unreasonable to us, that it would look unreasonable to the guys who wanted to fight it. You were not striking a blow against the war by organizing the welfare mothers in Detroit. You only thought you were. If you really wanted to strike a blow against the war, you would be working on the campuses, because it was the campuses that were generating the enormous heat, the enormous pressure, the enormous growth, and really shaping the political. There was a student movement, and it was growing. You didn't spend a nickel on it, and it grew. It was like a weed.
Well, in any event, to secure the help of the White House in the picture, they assigned, they got the White House to cause the liaison personality between the White House and the Hill, a major person, to go up to Hayes and try to get him to, as it were, actively oppose what the investigation was engaged in. And Hayes very kindly then would listen to this visit from Major Person. Then he would call me and say, "Norm, come up to my office. I have a good deal to tell you." I would go up. He'd tell me, "I've just had a visit from Major Person, and he wants me to break up this investigation." So I then say, "Well, Wayne, what did you do? What did you say to him?" He said, "I just told him to get the hell out." And he did that 3 times, and I got pretty proud of him in the sense that he was, as it were, backing me up. And we finally embarked upon hearing at Hayes' request, because he wanted to get them out of the way before he went abroad in the summer. And
but why were the hearings finally terminated? What happened to the committee?
What happened to the committee or the hearing?
The hearings. The hearings.
Oh, the hearings were terminated. Carol Reese was up against such a furor as Hayes, through the activity of our own counsel. Hayes became convinced that he was being double-crossed, and he put on a show in a public hearing room, Mr. Griffin, that was an absolute disgrace. And he called Carol Reese publicly every name in the book, and Mr. Reese took this as proof that he couldn't continue the hearing. He actually invited me to accompany him when he went down to Hayes' office, and in my presence, with the tears rolling down his face, Hayes apologized to Carol Reese for what he'd done and his conduct, apologized to me, And I thought that would be enough and Carol would resume. But he never did.
The charge of anti-Semitism is kind of intriguing to me. What was the basis of that charge?
That
was there
charge,
any basis for it at all?
No, the basis that the Republican National Committee used was that the intelligence officer I'd taken on my staff, when I oriented this investigation to the exposure of and proof of a conspiracy, was known to have a book, and the book was deemed to be anti-Semitic. This was childish, but this was the second in command of the Republican National Committee, and he told me I would have to dismiss this person from my staff.
Who was that person? Who was that person?
The person?
Yes.
A Colonel Lee Lorraine.
Lee Lorraine.
Yeah.
And what was his book, do you recall? The title of his book?
The book that they referred to was called Waters Flowing Eastward, which was a very castigation of the Jewish influence in the world.
What were some of the other charges made by Mr. Hayes against Mr. Reese?
Oh, just that Mr. Reese was utilizing this investigation for his own prominence inside the House of Representatives. That was the only charge Hayes could think of.
How would you describe the motivation of the people who created the foundations, the big foundations in the very beginning? What was their motivation?
Their motivation, well, let's take Mr. Carnegie as an example. His publicly declared and steadfast interest was to counteract the departure of the colonies from Great Britain. He was devoted to just putting the pieces back together again.
Would that have required the collectivism that they were dedicated to?
No. These policies or the Foundation's allegiance to these un-American concepts are all traceable to the transfer of the funds over into the hands of trustees, Mr. Griffin. Not the men who had a hand in the creation of the wealth that led to the endowment of, or as a use of that wealth for what we would call public purposes.
It was a subversion of the original intent then.
Oh, yeah, completely. And that we got into the world traditionally of bankers and lawyers.
How do you see that the purpose and direction of the major foundations has changed over the years to the present? What is it today?
Oh, 100% behind meeting the cost of education such as it is presented through the schools and colleges of the United States on the subject of our history has proven our original ideas to be no longer practical. The future belongs to a collectivistic concept, and there's just no disagreement on that.
Why do the foundations generously support communist causes in the United States?
Well, because to them, what communism represents a means of developing what we call a monopoly. That is, the organization, will say, of large-scale industry into an administrable unit.
Do they think that they will be one of the administrators?
They will be the beneficiaries of it, yes.